Imagine you're just 13 years old, and one day a voice tells you,
"You've been chosen to lead an army and save your country."
Sounds completely insane, right? But that's exactly what happened to Jeanne d'Arc, known in English as Joan of Arc. This isn't a fairy tale, this isn't fantasy, this is a real story, and it starts in the most unexpected place. Once upon a time, in the early 1400s, France was falling apart. The country was at war, fighting with England in what would be called the 100 Years' War. English soldiers had taken over huge parts of the land. The French king had no power, the people had no hope, and fear was everywhere. And in the middle of this chaos, in a tiny village called Domremy, a girl was born. Her name was Jeanne. She didn't live in a castle. She wasn't rich, she was just a farmer's daughter. But sometimes the people who change the world don't come from palaces, they come from the fields. Jeanne was quiet, hardworking, and deeply religious. She helped her family with animals, worked in the garden, and spent hours praying in church. Her life was simple until the voices came. It started when she was just 13 years old. One day, while she was in her father's garden, she heard a voice, not from someone nearby. No footsteps, no person, just a voice inside her head. A voice that told her something she could barely believe.
"You are chosen. You must save France."
At first, Jeanne was terrified. Wouldn't you be? What would you think if you heard a voice that no one else could hear? Would you think you were going crazy? But Jeanne didn't run. She listened, and the voices came again, over days, over weeks, and soon she believed these were holy voices coming from saints and even from God. They were giving her a mission: find the king, lead an army, drive out the English. Sounds like a fantasy, right? But she believed it, and that belief, it changed everything. Now ask yourself, would you follow a voice no one else could hear? Would you leave your home, your family, your safety to do the impossible? Jeanne did, and what she did next would shake the world. So, Jeanne hears these voices. She believes they're from heaven. But remember, she's just a teenager in a tiny village. No sword, no army, no royal blood, just faith. But that faith was powerful. At 16, she told her parents what she had to do. Of course, they were shocked. "You, a girl, go fight a war? Talk to the king?" They told her to stay home, to be normal, but Jeanne had made up her mind. Something inside her burned like fire. She couldn't ignore it. She tried to speak to the local commander of the French army. They laughed at her, literally laughed in her face.
"A girl! Lead soldiers, go home!"
But here's where it gets interesting. Jeanne didn't give up. She kept asking, she kept pushing, and finally, someone listened. They agreed to let her speak to the Prince of France, Charles, the man who was supposed to be king but hadn't been crowned yet. Now, let's pause here for a second. Think about it. You're a teenage girl who's never left her village. You've never held a sword. You've never spoken to a noble, let alone royalty. And now, you're on your way to meet the man who could become king? Why didn't she give up? What kept her going? Was it faith, destiny, or just something stronger than fear? When Jeanne finally reached the royal court, Charles wanted to test her. He was curious but careful. He dressed like a regular man and hid among his nobles to see if she could pick him out. And guess what? Jeanne walked straight up to him. No one had told her what he looked like. No one had pointed, but she knew. She said, "You are the Dauphin, the son of the true king." And in that moment, everything changed. People stopped laughing. Charles listened. He was desperate. His army was losing. His people were starving. And this strange young girl had a confidence no soldier had shown in years. So he gave her a chance. Jeanne was given armor, a sword, and command of troops. Yes, an actual army. Imagine that. Farmers, knights, and generals now looking to a teenage girl for orders. How does that even happen? Because sometimes courage speaks louder than experience. And sometimes, when no one else dares to believe, one person believing is enough. Now, Jeanne had what she needed. Armor, a horse, a white banner with holy symbols, and an army behind her. But this wasn't just any battle. Her mission was clear: liberate the city of Orleans. Orleans was surrounded by English forces. The French had tried and failed to save it for months. Soldiers were tired, morale was low, but Jeanne rode in like a spark in the dark. The people cheered as she arrived, some with hope, others with doubt. "Who is this girl?" they asked. "Can she really change anything?" She didn't talk like a general. She didn't act like a noble. But there was something different about her, something fierce and unstoppable. Jeanne didn't just sit in the back and give orders. No, she led from the front. Sword in hand, banner flying, she charged with her troops into the thick of battle. And something incredible happened. They started winning. One by one, the English strongholds around Orleans fell. In just 9 days, Jeanne and her army did what months of fighting couldn't. They broke the siege. Orleans was free. Imagine the shock. Imagine the whispers spreading through the land. A girl, a teenage girl, turned the tide of war. Some called it a miracle. Others said it was madness. But no one could ignore it. Suddenly, everyone was watching Jeanne, but Jeanne didn't stop to celebrate. She said, "God gave me a mission, and it's not finished yet." She told Charles, "You must be crowned king, not in some castle hiding place, in Reims, where French kings have always been crowned." That was bold. Reims was deep in enemy territory. But Jeanne didn't care. She believed this was her purpose. And Charles? He believed too. So they marched again. Along the way, more cities joined her, more soldiers followed. The people began to believe, not just in Jeanne, but in France again. And after many dangerous days, they reached Reims. In the great cathedral, with Jeanne standing beside him, Charles was crowned King of France. Let that sink in. A girl from a village, who had never left home just a year before, now stood beside a king she helped crown. She had changed history. But what happens when your mission is complete? What happens when power, politics, and fear start creeping back in? After the coronation, Jeanne should have been celebrated as a national hero. And for a while, she was. Crowds cheered her name. Songs were written about her. Even hardened generals respected her. But something strange started to happen. Now that King Charles had his crown, he began to change. Before, he had desperately needed Jeanne, but now he didn't. Or maybe he just thought he didn't. Jeanne wanted to keep going. She believed the mission wasn't over. Parts of France were still under English control. She said, "We have to free Paris. We must finish what we started." But the king, he hesitated. He listened to his advisors' men who didn't like Jeanne's power. They said she was too young, too bold, too different. Have you ever noticed how some people are only supported when they're useful, but forgotten when they start shining too brightly? Still, Jeanne didn't stop. With or without full support, she marched toward Paris. She led a brave attack, but this time things didn't go her way. She was wounded by an arrow and pulled off the battlefield. The king refused to send more help. Jeanne, for the first time, was stuck, injured, ignored, and the powerful men around the king started turning their backs on her. But she didn't give up. Even without the crown's support, she kept fighting. That's what makes her story so powerful. Jeanne didn't fight for fame. She didn't fight for reward. She truly believed in something bigger than herself. In 1430, while defending a small town, Jeanne was captured by enemy forces, the Burgundians, who were allied with the English. She was taken prisoner. For months, she was locked away, chained, questioned, and passed around like a trophy. And then came the darkest chapter of her story. The English wanted to destroy her not on the battlefield, but in the court. Not as a soldier, but as a symbol. They didn't just want to kill Jeanne. They wanted to make people doubt her. So they put her on trial not for war, but for heresy, for claiming she spoke with God, for dressing in men's clothes, for being different. It was never a fair trial. She had no lawyer. The judges were chosen by her enemies. They twisted her words. They tried to trap her. Can you imagine? A 19-year-old girl, exhausted in chains, defending herself alone against dozens of grown men in robes and titles. But Jeanne didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stood tall and answered every question with strength and calm. Even her enemies were shocked at how smart she was, how brave. One judge even whispered,
"This girl speaks better than most priests."
But truth didn't matter. In 1431, after months of prison, threats, and loneliness, they declared her guilty. They burned her at the stake. She was 19. But is that really the end of Jeanne's story? Or is there something more? They thought burning Jeanne would erase her, that fire would turn her into ash and silence. But some stories only grow stronger after they end. After Jeanne was executed, many people were shocked, and not just in France. Even some of her enemies began to wonder, did we just kill a holy girl? Soldiers who once laughed at her began to speak of her with respect. People whispered her name in prayers, and something strange happened. The English started losing. The tide of the war turned. French troops pushed back. City by city, they reclaimed their land. And many believed that Jeanne had started that change, not just with swords, but with belief. 20 years later, something incredible happened. The King of France, yes, the same Charles who Jeanne helped crown, finally allowed a new trial. This time, not to accuse Jeanne, but to clear her name. They interviewed over 100 people, villagers, soldiers, priests, even judges from her old trial, and piece by piece, the truth came out. The voices were real to her. She never lied. She never betrayed anyone. She was innocent. In 1456, the court announced its final decision. Jeanne d'Arc had been wrongly executed. She was declared a martyr, a victim of political hate. Hundreds of years later, in 1920, the Catholic Church made it official. Jeanne d'Arc was declared a saint. A saint, from a simple farm girl, to a commander, to a prisoner, to a legend, to a saint. So now, think about this. She had no army when she started, no title, no money, no fame. She was just a girl who believed something deep in her heart and refused to give up. Isn't that the kind of bravery we need more of? Jeanne's story isn't just about war, it's about purpose, about how one voice, just one, can shake kings, lift nations, and echo across centuries. So next time someone tells you you're too young, too small, too different to matter, remember Jeanne. She heard a voice, she followed it, and she changed the world. And that was the story of Joan of Arc. A girl with no sword, no army, no power, just belief. If her story made you think, or maybe inspired you even a little, hit that like button, subscribe for more true stories that sound unbelievable, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if a voice told you to change the world? Thanks for watching, and remember, even the smallest voice can echo through history.